All right, we are out of practice session and we are recording. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
It's actually just walking in now.
Commissioner Layden, you are unmuted and may speak if you wish to address the room.
Wait 1 second. Sounds like he's walking in.
Hey guys, how are you? Completely out of practice mode, right? Oh, is this me? It is me. I can hear myself. Good. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those that joined us in the work session yesterday, it was a very robust conversation. We ended up talking about a lot of interesting things, including one of the negative externalities associated with displaced students in our school systems. We're really thankful for the conversation with the school district, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks for being here.
So good morning, everyone. Just because we're doing a hybrid meeting, what worked really well, and I think we put in the chat as well. If you would like to speak, and that gives us kind of a head.
Jen, we are not able to hear you at all. Not a word.
I can.
Are we muted? Did you hear?
We can hear the room, but we're not picking you up.
Let me try again. Is that better?
Yes, better.
Okay. Okay, good reminder for everyone in the room. We need to face the mics, not the camera. So the mics are in the center of the room. In addition to that, for those who are online, if you want to participate in the conversation, if you could please turn your video on so that we can see you and recognize that you would like to be called on to speak. That worked pretty well last time, so we thought we would do that again. Other than that, I do have a sign-in sheet for those who are in the room. Jennifer Osario would want me to say, please sign in if you get a chance. And other than that, I think we were ready to go, Dan.
Perfect. And we do have some food for the folks in the room, some food and some coffee. Please help yourself.
Oh, and please, since it is a longer meeting, feel free to, restrooms are at the end of the hall. To personally, please feel free.
Well, we're going to get going. Thanks for coming to the executive team meeting today. Not sure that we will take the time to do introductions because most of us were here last time and we have some really good data to talk about. So with that, we're going to have Rand Clark present, and he's going to take over most of the meeting. Feel free to ask questions as we go. We did go over this with the working group yesterday, and it was a very rich conversation. Rand, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me get everything going here. Well, the main topic of discussion today is our results of our point-in-time survey that we took last month. We spent some time discussing how we were going to conduct that count. But for those of you who may not have been with us last month, I'll offer a brief overview of the point in time, talk about how we did our count, and then we'll get into some of the data. One note, if you did join us yesterday in the work group meeting, there's a lot of great feedback provided around this data. So the report you'll see today has been edited to reflect some of the discussion yesterday. That's the great piece about our work group is we had a chance to vet a lot of this through our partners and through the boots on the ground experts yesterday. And so we've got some feedback from them and have made a few changes. So if you did see this yesterday, if you saw a screenshot of something from yesterday, know that today's report will be slightly different because we wanted to learn from our time in our conversation yesterday. So with that, just a review of the point in time. The point in time is count as a survey of sheltered and unsheltered people experiencing homelessness on a single night in January. That night is defined by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development as being one of the last 10 nights in January annually. It is conducted across the metro region, so all of the 7 counties in Denver conducted their count on Monday, January the 24th, and people were asked specifically where did they spend the night or where did they stay the night of January 24th. In Douglas County, we had a few days to work on that, and so we had outreach teams out as early as sundown on Monday evening, the 24th, and continued to work through snow, especially on Tuesday. It was quite the snowy day. But through Tuesday, Wednesday, and even a little bit on Thursday to capture as much information as we can from those that were experiencing homelessness in our community. The unsheltered survey was conducted primarily by law enforcement teams from all of our jurisdictions. Very, very, very big note of thanks and gratitude to our partners in law enforcement who really did contribute just a massive amount of resources to help us get this count done in a much more thorough way this year. We could not have done and achieved the information we were receiving without our partners in law enforcement. We had support from many of our partners who volunteered, who came out with our outreach teams and spent some time all bundled up. Jen had like her toque on and her scarf on and like 5 pairs of gloves. I may or may not have had a pair of long johns under my jeans. It was cold that day. Actually, I think they were my Lulu yoga pants, maybe, but we'll stay away from that. But it was cold, and so a huge shout out to all of those that really did a great job that day of joining us. Really big thanks to them, and then a lot of our local agencies, as folks came into their organizations, helped us conduct surveys. If folks were sheltered through our shelter network, transitional housing, through our main sort of hotel voucher system, we collected data from our Empower data system on the folks that were staying in shelters that we knew about. So as a reminder, this is the map that we use to kind of guide our outreach efforts. We focused on the areas in blue. That's primarily the I-25, C-470 corridor, the major trails and thoroughfares. Did a really, really, really good job, I think, of really canvassing those areas in blue. And we did have enough resources to get a little bit of the green areas as we spread out, especially kind of up, kind of in the up and down the 83 corridor. We spent some time out there with law enforcement and some of their partners out there. So we're able to hit a little bit of the green, but focused primarily on the blue areas. We did not go into any of the purples. We did not send anybody up into the national forest. It was a low priority for us, and the weather was not cooperative either. So just a couple of kind of notes about what I'm about to show you. Some things to keep in mind. One is in Douglas County, as a result of the efforts of this initiative, we wanted to expand the count to include our definition of homeless. And so you're going to see a number of folks regarding the number of folks in our community who are experiencing homelessness. That is a different number than what is going to be officially reported to HUD. The primary reason is HUD's definition is very focused and very specific. And as we talked last time, in our last couple of meetings, there are folks in our community that are experiencing homelessness that are require services from one of any number of our partners and do have an impact on our community that even though they may not be counted by HUD, we want to know about them and count them here locally because their story is valuable to how we address the issue. And so it is an expanded count due to our expanded definition. And we're just going to have to understand that those two numbers are going to be different. That's okay. We understand why. Second thing is that this is a more thorough count this year than I've ever been a part of. I think this is my 10th. We've never spent the time and the resources on counting the way we did this year. Even as thorough a job as we did, it's still not complete. It's still not complete. We don't have the full story. We may never. We don't know every single person that was staying in somebody's house. We don't know, temporarily. We don't know everybody that was staying in a hotel that would otherwise have been outside. We have more of an idea, but we don't know it all. I've described it this way. I think it's a pretty good picture. It's like you're doing a puzzle and the cover on the box doesn't match the pieces. And then you're missing some pieces on top of that. And so it really is sort of that. We have an idea of what homelessness looks like. That's the cover on the box. But we have pieces inside of that are helping us tell the real story, but we still may be missing some pieces. And we need to recognize that it doesn't reflect everybody. It doesn't reflect every circumstance, but it tells us more than we ever have. And then finally, the formal point in time data will be released later this year. So we talk about our definition being different from HUD's. I have submitted those surveys to the regional to DCHI, who helps coordinate that count regionally. Their team is working through that data from all 7 counties. And they typically release that report sometime in late May, June-ish timeframe. And we'll see more. But the reason for that, the reason why it takes so time is that they're not just counting ours, they're counting everybody's. They're also deduplicating, cleaning the data, make sure that everything meets HUD standards. It's oftentimes in years past, we have submitted a survey or two that is determined to not, that person is from HUD's definition, not determined to be eligible. We completed a few surveys for folks that were in our community on Tuesday, but they spent the night in Arapahoe County. That also happens the other way. There may be some folks that were contacted by a service provider in Arapahoe County or Denver on Tuesday or Wednesday, and a survey was conducted, but they ended up staying the night in Douglas County. And so there's just some time that goes on to get to that good number. But when we have that, along with the region-wide report, we'll share that with you. I think it'll be important for us to see not just that number as it relates to our community, but also as it relates to the Denver metro area. It'll be a good picture of what's going on regionally. So as we get beyond that, let me give you the first slide, which is the one you all want to see. So for our point in time count, we surveyed 166 people experiencing homelessness the night of January 24th, 2022. So 166. Of those, 72, we believe, were qualified by definition to be included in our point in time study. And so we have submitted 72 to the Denver Metro Homelessness. We've submitted those surveys for their consideration and inclusion in our count. We had 11 that were basically, they refused to participate. We said, hey, can we ask some questions? They said, like, no, thank you. Or we were only able to observe them. We didn't want to wake somebody up who was in their car, kind of idea, right? And so we had 11 refusals or observations. We had 60 in care facilities. So let me define a care facility. A care facility is a place where somebody might spend the night, but they were provided some sort of level of care. So we would typically think of that as somebody in a hospital, somebody in an emergency room. We did get some folks that were in our hospitals and emergency rooms that night. We had some folks that were in our behavioral health providers. So Denver Springs, Highlands Behavioral, both had some folks that when they came into their facility were homeless and would otherwise, the expectations that they would otherwise be homeless when they leave their facility. But we had some folks spending it there. And then similarly, in Douglas County Detention, we had some residents who were spent the night on the 24th. When they entered into the detention, they were registered as coming in from being homeless. And so for one reason or another, they were brought into detention and they were homeless upon entry is the way we qualified that data. Now, those folks are not, do not fit HUD's point in time definition of homelessness, but we certainly believe that it's valuable to include them because those are folks that are receiving services in our community, be that through a care provider, the sheriff's office or whomever. So we included those 60 that are in a care facility. We had 9 that were temporarily housed. So those would be folks that we knew about that were couch surfing. We had somebody who was in a hotel that paid for the hotel on their own instead of by an agency. And so we had 9 that were temporarily housed. And then we counted 14 who were not in Douglas County the night of January 24th. Those were primarily people that we found out on the streets the morning after the count. So say, getting off at a light rail station or on a street corner panhandling or, around the community, but, had their stuff with them. And as they were contacted and asked about their condition, whether or not they were homeless, we found out that they were in our community for some reason the day after, but they spent Monday night in Denver or in Aurora or in Lakewood or wherever they were from, but not in Douglas County. So we had 14 that were not in Douglas County. I want to give you just a little bit of an idea of where that stands sort of historically. So I'm not going to use the 166 because we've never reported the expanded definition before. So I can't tell you sort of based on this broad definition of homelessness that we looked at, like care facilities, what that's looked like historically. This is the first year we really included that. So I'm going to base this number off of the 72, the ones that we are sending off for formal inclusion in the point in time, because we did conduct a similar methodology over past years. And this is what that data looks like historically over the last 6 years. So in 2021, we counted 43. One note on 2021, due to COVID, we did not count anybody who was unsheltered. We did not do any outreach yesterday due to public health concerns. So we only counted those that were in shelter, in transitional housing, or in hotels last year in 2021, so 43. 2020 was the last time we had a complete count of homelessness. This was just prior to the pandemic, so it occurred in what we would call our traditional way, and I think is probably the best relative data would be 2020. 2019, there's only 14, but we were missing 5 from Winter Shelter Network. That was a low year. The church that was hosting Winter Shelter Network that night was right on the border of Douglas and Arapahoe County, and the data based on where the pin was dropped on GIS was included in Arapahoe County's data. And so we know that. And so we put a little asterisk next to our 2019 data. It would have increased our number by 5 from 14 up to 19. And then in 2018 and 2017, very similar numbers of 34 and 35. But if we go back farther than 2017, there was another change at the federal level around who was included in the count. And so the data it's hard to compare that data at this point in life. But I think it's safe to say that we've experienced somewhere between, kind of the average of the last few years has been kind of in the mid 30s. And so to say relatively that we've experienced a doubling of our homeless population this year based on the data we have is not unreasonable. I can't tell you why that is. Our guesses would be things like, well, we put in a whole lot more effort in finding folks this year. And so it doesn't surprise us that we found more and counted more. But I think also anecdotally, if we asked most of the people in this room in the work group yesterday, most people also feel like they have experienced more individuals who are experiencing homelessness in our community. And this data would support that as well. And so I think there is a narrative around homelessness on the increase in Douglas County. And I think our data now supports that. We have both the story and the data to back that up, the qualitative and the quantitative now. Those two things come into alignment. So before I go on to some digging a little bit deeper on where and who and what their conditions are, I'll pause there and allow people to ask any questions at the highest level on the total number, what we sort of found to this point, any data on the history, and then we'll kind of dig deeper into the data on understanding who they were, what they were facing, those kinds of things. So I'll pause there. Luke, if anybody jumps online, let me know, help us out, or of course, anybody in the room. Once we drink the coffee before it gets cold.
Question that was asked yesterday, and I will ask this question to the room and online too, is do these numbers surprise anyone? Is this shocking? Did you think it was going to be more or less? Commissioner Layden spoke earlier in the meeting. We had a really rich discussion yesterday with representatives of law enforcement of whether or not they thought they were surprised at any of this. And nobody was, but there was lots of conversation about what people are seeing or not seeing and where they're seeing them. So I would ask that same question here: is any of this surprising?
So it's kind of right on to what some of the things we're neglecting, but it's not surprising this day and age.
Councilman, they can't hear you.
Not surprising.
Is that the summary? I would say this too, and I know the number is increasing. We're hitting up to 72 here, but I feel like there's so many on the tipping point. Like that 72 could go to 150 tomorrow. We're just so close to seeing so many more in that. Like in the number of people that we're helping right now, I'm sure like all the groups that are, the number of people we're seeing come into the food bank that are just right on the verge of homelessness. They're still in a place, but they're about to lose it. So it's just, it's day to day for so many people right now. So even though we're at the highest that we've seen in the number, I think that number could quickly double just with any shaking or anything like that. And all of a sudden we've got twice the problem.
Jump on that too, Mike, is with the way societies, and let's just all take a look at our own selves and the way we're paying our bills or the way we're taking responsibility things, that's that tipping point. We're being let off the hook on natural responsibilities. You're able to be responsible, take care of those things that are first. That's that tipping point. I think there's a tipping point where people are being allowed to go that direction. And the rest of society's got to pick it up. But there are those people that need some serious help. Those are the ones we got to focus on that need to be pulled up from further down. But some on that tipping point, They need a little gentle reminder of, hey, either go this way or that way. So, I look at my own situation and where you could be or couldn't be. What are you doing with your money you have now? I know that you're allowed to charge up whatever. I think there's a lot of good people that get in trouble because they don't stop or listen to advice from good folks around them.
I think the tipping point is a really good way to put it. Melissa and I had the opportunity for the last week to talk to someone who was really angry at the Department of Human Services, really, really, really angry. And when we were able to actually have a civil conversation with her, she's not angry at us. She's scared of her situation. She's 2 months behind on her rent. She's paying all of her money to childcare. She has an abusive ex-husband. She didn't know what sort of services. She's afraid she's going to lose her house at any given time, which is why she's so mad. But she could be mad at Melissa because Melissa wasn't going to be mad back at her. But when you really drill down in it, she would be homeless, will be homeless if we didn't intervene. And to your point, not everybody knows where to look. Not everybody knows how to utilize those services. But Mike, I think that's right on about. We could double this tomorrow if we don't start thinking about proactively helping.
There's just to share with the group, from the law enforcement side of this, one of the things, and I don't know if Castle Rock's online, but so I don't want to speak for Castle Rock if they are, but Sergeant Torrance brought up a great observation because Castle Rock PD has done a remarkably good job of working with their homeless population and trying to build a partnership with them so that they, well, long story short, when they go out and do the survey, they went out looking for their known homeless because they deal with them every time. And what Sergeant Torrance shared was what he was surprised at, the ones they went looking for, they couldn't find. And a lot of that was because of the weather and that kind of stuff. But they did find new homeless that they weren't aware of that were in their city. And Castle Rock's homeless population is really expanding. That was one of the things that was shared. The other thing that I want to just point out to the group is one of the other, when we've been going out for the past 5 months, talking to the homeless, asking them what their needs are, where they came from, far majority of them are coming from Denver. Why are you in Douglas County? What brought you to Douglas County? And what we're hearing more and more and more from them is safety. They're afraid of Denver. They're afraid of the streets. They're afraid of the shelters. They're afraid of for their own personal safety. So they're migrating out to south to the suburbs into Arapahoe County down in Douglas County because it's safer here. And we don't have the shelters, so they're hitting the streets. But I think safety is a big factor that we always have to remember. These are people and they care for their own personal safety as well, just like we do. And go ahead.
Well, I'll show some data on that specific question here in a minute. But we hear that I feel safer living outside in Douglas County than I feel living in a shelter in another community. And so we hear that quite a bit. And so there's a couple of written questions, right? Is that what you're asking about, Jen?
Well, there's a couple of questions. So, District Attorney.
And we can't hear you.
DA Kellner, do you have a question?
I think it may have written it down. Does include people who are he asked, I believe this is John. It just says John. So I apologize if it's the wrong John, but I'm going to make that assumption.
That's me.
Okay. Yeah. You're asking about people in custody. So yes, we did include those that were in custody at Douglas County Detention Facility that were identified as being homeless upon entry into the facility. So we did include that, and I have that number broken down here shortly, but they were included. And then Councilmember Johnson also asked a question about coming down from Denver, and I think we sort of addressed that, and we'll get to that a little bit later in some of the other data as well. So did that answer for you?
It does. I'm just curious to see what that breakdown is, and I think it's great that you guys are getting so much granularity in your data because it really helps us tackle the discrete issues. Because I think one thing that's really clear from all of these discussions is there's not one reason or two reasons or even three behind why we're seeing an increase in people experiencing homelessness. So understanding how many are potentially in custody is important, at least from my slice of how we can tackle this. Thanks.
That leads right into where we're headed with this. And I think, Chief, you shared the story from Sergeant Torrance. And actually, I saw the list. They had a list of everybody that they knew. They found about half of them. They couldn't find about half of them. And then they found 50% more than they were expecting to find. So it was, they found many of them, but they couldn't find many. So it's definitely something that's on the radar. So, all right. So here is the where they spent the night. So beyond just the idea of the non-Douglas County or those that are temporarily housed or those in care facilities, we went a little bit farther and asked where folks were. So we had 29 that were staying outside. So those were ones that identified that were essentially staying unsheltered outside in some way, shape, or form. That could be a more traditional or developed encampment or some sort of makeshift something or other, right? But spent their time outside. 25 were in vehicles. We found a lot of folks in cars, but we also equally found a lot of folks in RVs. Sometimes they were unregistered, unlicensed, but we have a few of them. Dan could speak more to that. Dan Marlowe, if he wanted to chime in on some of the RV issues that they're seeing, he's got there are a few down in his neck of the woods. We had 13 in hotels. This is one of those underrepresented numbers. We know that when we talk about not having a complete picture, we know that there are more people staying in our hotels. Again, we don't go to every hotel and knock on the door and say, would you otherwise be homeless if you weren't here? But we know that's an underrepresented number, but we know that we had at least 13. We had 13 in transitional housing. I will make a note on that. We did have one empty transitional housing unit. It's in the process. Somebody just moved out into housing and we're waiting to place the next family, but it was empty the night of the count. We had 3 in our domestic violence through domestic violence shelter through the crisis center. We had 60 in care facilities, more on sort of the breakdown of that coming up here shortly, but that would include behavioral health, hospitals, and detention. 9 were temporarily housed. So again, this is an underreported number. This would be those that were primarily couch surfing. So they were staying temporarily with friends and family. We asked to include that, but again, it's unless they tell us that, it's hard to know that somebody who's couch surfing is homeless. They're not always easily to identify unless you know that family. And so with great help from the school district, we were able to identify a handful of those. Through some of our partners, we were able to identify a few, but we did have some that were temporarily housed. And then again, these 14 that weren't in Douglas County. A note on that, we saw kind of 2 things. One is folks that were coming down to Douglas County to panhandle, go to the store, making their way through town as they're headed south. We also had vice versa, some of folks who I would consider more our residents that were staying in Douglas County. So there were a couple of families in particular that were families with kiddos in our school district, but their hotels that they were living at were in Arapahoe County. We have folks that come and receive services that are a part of our system of care that we do connect with through human services, through the school district in one way, shape, or form. But they spent the night outside of Douglas County because that's where they could find shelter and they could find safety. And so, those non-DC ones weren't just the ones coming down to Panhandle and sit, on I-25 and Lincoln. They may have been also our families that, used to live in our community. Their kids are going to our schools, but they were displaced and now they're staying in Family Promise or they're staying in a hotel that's less expensive. They can afford those kinds of scenarios. So we did see some of those in not Douglas County as well. And so where did they spend the night jurisdictionally? And so we had 78 in Castle Rock. That included for the first time this number of 47 that were in the detention center. So there were 31 that were out on the streets in cars, in transitional housing, in hotels in Castle Rock. And then there were 47 that were in the detention center that Monday night. And so that is the number in Castle Rock. We had 18 in Parker, 24 in Lone Tree. We had 32 in unincorporated Douglas County. We know 15 of them for sure were in Highlands Ranch. It got a little bit hard when you're out along a trail and you're just talking to folks to always recognize where that line is sometimes. And so we did our best on that unincorporated Douglas County. We couldn't always sort of attach that to a more specific place, but we had some over in the Meridian Village area. We had some over, Challenger Park. Like we had them sort of spread out across the county, but we know that 15 were primarily in what we would all consider mostly Highlands Ranch. And then again, that 14 not in Douglas County. So pause there again, answer any questions about the where or what conditions they experienced. And then we have some more rich data around what were some of their contributing factors. Why were they homeless? Why did they not seek shelter service? But any questions about the where we found them in terms of place or location, like a car outside?
I have a comment, not necessarily on where you found them, but this is a great report, by the way, really good. I'm curious, do you capture somewhere the weather conditions within your report? Because I think in 3 years from now, when we look back and we say, gosh, that's kind of a low number, were we just ramping up? I have to believe that the snow and cold drove some homeless to places where we couldn't find them.
So in the formal point in time count, they typically note weather. We can certainly include that if we want to formalize this. I will tell you historically, weather it's a 6 one way, half dozen the other, right? So when they're cold, they are driven to shelters, and regionally, we're actually able to more easily count them because they tend to be inside. We also lose some that might stay with friends and family. Also, if the weather is good, and I've done this in good weather years, we actually have found fewer because they're less likely to need services. It's easier to be out in the air quotes middle of nowhere and not be able to be found because you're not worried about the weather conditions. So there's kind of a good news and bad news with weather. They go into our hotels, they go into our traditional shelter system metro wide, but they may not be here and vice versa. So one of the things we talked about, I think robustly yesterday, is this idea that we want to do another similar count in the summer months, maybe sometime in June or July timeframe, to get an understanding of what it looks like when the weather conditions are drastically different. And so I think that will be helpful. We have a snow day and hopefully a nice day come the summertime, not a snow day in July, although it could, I guess it's Colorado. And so, we want to be able to do that. I think it's a good observation. Weather does have an impact. I can't say in the 10 years that I've done it that I can say low weather, like bad weather, bad count, good weather, good count. It feels like it sort of evens itself out depending on which way you do it for different reasons. That's just my experience, but certainly always is a fact. Any other questions? Looks like someone's trying to maybe come on there. Is that Dr. Reif?
It is. Ryan, just to reinforce your point, I think it's across the region, what we see is on cold nights, like the ones we saw, people are in shelter. So our sheltered numbers go up and our unsheltered numbers go down across the region. And then when it's a warmer year, the unsheltered numbers go up and the sheltered numbers go down. So I think to your point, Rand, it just is like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It's just where you find people, but it's the overall number. So is what we see across the region. And
in Douglas County, that's a little bit opposite, right? Actually, on cold nights, our sheltered numbers go down because they go up to where there are shelters. Because we don't have shelter, because we don't have the same level of service, we actually see our shelter number typically go down in those cold weather nights as opposed to in the warm weather nights we see it. So it's a little bit weird. Again, because the issue of the facility and the service, but again, region wide, yes.
And then, Rand, can I make one more just point while I'm on camera? Is that this is incredible. First of all, thank you, Douglas County, for putting so much time into this and really digging into the data. And Rand, I love that you included these other kind of situations that aren't included in the HUD definition. And generally what we find, just to kind of talk through, what it might look like in a year. I know in the region, what we find is a time number, and you times that by about 5. And that's the number of people that probably are experiencing homelessness in a given year, just to give some context to that. Because this is one night, it's a very, kind of narrow definition, but generally what we see is about 5 times that amount over the course of a year. Thank you.
Thank you. To come. Any other questions, comments? Keep digging, get a little bit deeper here. So we asked a series of questions around who they are so we can understand family conditions, demographics. We did identify 3 that were veterans. That was self-disclosed, so we have not vetted those. All of these things are self-disclosed. There could be more. Those 3, I have no reason to believe that they were lying, but we identified 3. Of the ones that we had this data on, 39% were single men, 18% were single women, 10% were multiple adults with no children, and 33% were families with children. So that could be single mom and kid, single dad and kid, 2 adults with kid, grandmother with kid. We kind of lumped them all together as families with children experiencing homelessness. Now, I made sort of really brief reference to those that we have data on. Because of the observe refuse and because of the data we have coming out of our care facilities, we didn't get deep demographic data out of all of those agencies. Like, the chief is sitting here next to me, so I'll just use it as an example. I may know male and female, but I may not know how many were single male versus single parent father, like when they came in. We don't have that level of detail with all 166. We have that level of detail on about 101. So I would say a relatively strong sample set. But again, it's not perfect. It's what we have. And so that's why we'll go to percentages here for many of these because it's some people said, I know you slept in a car. I know there was one person in the car. I don't know that that necessarily equated to a single person or just, the other person wasn't there with them when we were there counting. And so again, we don't have all of the demographic data on all. So this is sample set 101 out of the 166. I will tell you that's what we're counting right now as we do these percentages. And then in terms of length of time homeless, we had 44% were homeless for greater than a year. 28% have been homeless between 90 days and 1 year, and 28% were homeless for less than 90 days. The reason why I chose to break them up is because we know sort of historically in systems of care around homelessness, if we can address homelessness with those that have been homeless for less than 90 days, we have a greater likelihood of them achieving an outcome of being stably housed. The longer you have been homeless, the more complex the issues, the greater the barriers to an outcome of stable housing. And so we can look at that 44% and say, we might be able to get them there, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take more work. We might be able to be more quickly successful with the 28%. And so oftentimes we look at those who are newly homeless, those that have been homeless a very short amount of time and say, that might be a population that we can try to address their condition in terms of that outcome of stably housed. Recognize that we have a lot of folks, almost half, that have a lot of complex barriers, and it's not just going to be solved overnight. It's going to take some time to help them become stably housed. We asked a series of questions regarding disabling conditions. These are required by HUD. This goes into how HUD defines the term chronic homeless. So we asked them about physical disability, developmental disabilities, chronic health conditions, mental health concerns, drug or alcohol abuse, if they're fleeing domestic violence, if there's HIV/AIDS, or if they had a TBI, traumatic brain injury. And you'll see here that physical disability, chronic health conditions, mental health concerns, drug and alcohol abuse, those 4 were by far the 4 highest. And so we recognize that physical health and behavioral health are absolutely issues that folks are facing if they are experiencing homelessness. We know that that combination is critical, providing physical health care, whether it's a disability or just a chronic health concern, and then their behavioral health, including drugs, alcohol, mental health. That is critical. I was asked yesterday to dig into a little bit of who labeled no disabling conditions. So again, out of the 101, 33 of them reported 0 disabling conditions. Now, again, these are self-disclosed. We're not asking them for the secret traumatic brain injury handshake to let us know. These are self-disclosed, and so we do our best to just take them at their word. There's some discretion. I'll be honest with you, like there's times where somebody, like I can smell the alcohol on them and they would say there's not alcohol or drug abuse. Like, so it's not perfect. It is self-disclosed. We know that, but we do the best we can. We take that into consideration. But physical health, behavioral health are absolutely things that have to be addressed.
Can I bring something up? Something I want to point out here, when you look at the mental health issues and the drug and alcohol dependencies, If you combine those two categories, that's 35. That's the highest level, right? Mental health is they self-disclose. 17 of them self-disclosed as mental health. 18 of them disclosed as they have a drug or alcohol dependency. The one thing I want to share is the one thing I learned when I was the commander of our jail for 4 years, dealing with inmates that we had diagnosed as dual diagnosed, both drug and alcohol and mental health. The one thing that really changed my philosophy on all my years in law enforcement, I always looked at it as drug and alcohol dependency caused their mental health condition. And what I learned was I had it ass backwards. Their mental health disability caused their drug and alcohol dependency because they were medicating, thank you, Dan, because of their mental health. So I always look at those two categories as one, because that's what we see out on the street. And it's the one thing it's the message we're trying to send to the community is taking away some of the prejudicial ideas people have about homeless is they're either nuts or they're drunks. Well, they're kind of a combination of both, but it's really more of a mental health issue than it is a drug and alcohol issue. Does that make sense? And that's where this county, with the Douglas County Mental Health Initiative, I think is really in the forefront of trying to address the mental health issues that is causing some of these other issues with our citizens, and here, same with our homes. So,
And let me clarify one thing. So this was a multiple select response. So somebody could have selected mental health and drug alcohol. And maybe one of the things I need to do, Chief, is go back and sort of look at who disclosed both.
Right.
Because I don't have a unique number of folks that disclosed one and or both. But we definitely know, like, I think this data is very clear that those are issues. And what you said is absolutely right. They do exist together in many ways. So again, great information here that we have. We also asked, what are the factors that contributed to their being homeless? And again, there were some dividing lines. There were actually about 20 or so of these different factors. I didn't list you all 20 of them because once we got beyond 9, the rest of them were kind of like 1, 2, and 3. And but I listed kind of the top 10. But family relationship problems or breakup, divorce, 28. Again, this is multiple select, so people could choose multiple of these. In fact, a lot of times when they said family relationship problems, they also would put over here abuse or violence in the home. Like those two we often saw together, or this number 16, I was asked to leave. That makes sense, right? You're in a situation where there's abuse or violence in a home. That's a family relationship breakup or problem. I'm asked to leave the house, or I choose to leave the house. So we see these things oftentimes coexist. Again, alcohol, substance abuse problems, high up on the list. We see this issue, I think, that Pastor Mike mentioned earlier, unable to pay your rent or your mortgage. We also see down at the 10 of the unable to pay utilities, that cost of housing being a barrier. There's this number 16, lost a job, can't find work. And so that may have contributed to their homelessness. And what we know is once they are experiencing homelessness, it's oftentimes harder to find, obtain, maintain a job if they don't have a place to shower, get clean, those kinds of things, lack transportation, get a good night's rest. We had some PTSD that was involved in that. It's part of that mental health, behavioral health issues. Client choice, we did see about 10, and the data is pretty consistent, between 10 to 12 of the folks we surveyed that said, it's my choice to live outside. I would rather be outside than inside. It has become normal to them. It's their reality. And so we did see that in a handful of folks that they would choose to be. In fact, was it you, Steve, or was it Luke? One of you guys surveyed a guy that was in an RV and is like, I'm not homeless. This is my house. This is where I live. I got no problem with this, right? Like, was it Luke? And so, we included him in the survey, but that was his view and his perspective. And then again, these sort of disabling conditions were at cause for homeless. Then we asked them, what are the barriers to using existing shelter services? Again, this is a multiple select. They could select multiples of these, but some of the ones we saw high. Availability and location. I don't know necessarily how to distinguish those. I apologize. I skipped a slide. But we saw those a lot of times together. And what we heard as we got into the narrative and we saw what people wrote down, it was this idea that there wasn't a shelter where they wanted to be quite honest with you, or I have to be there by a certain time at night and I can't get there by that certain time at night. So we definitely saw that. This issue that the chief mentioned earlier, that I said we had some data around this safety issue, that I feel safer outside in a certain community than I feel inside in a shelter in other communities, was a big one. Again, this by choice, this 10 or 11 that says I prefer to stay outside. We did see pets listed as a barrier, and then too many rules. And I haven't done the deep dive on this, but as I reflect on those too many rules, that oftentimes was circled on the same ones where drug or alcohol abuse was an issue. You know, and so there is an issue there, right, around how do we help folks that are struggling with addiction, help them become sober, so that the rules aren't, so that their addiction isn't the barrier, right? Their addiction is the barrier, and it plays itself out in too many rules because of the addiction. But we want to help address the addiction issue so that that issue of too many rules doesn't exist, because now there's that has been addressed. And so again, these are the top ones. There were a handful of others, again, that I got 1 or 2 responses. This was not a required question. We didn't get it from everybody. Somebody who was in transitional housing or somebody who was in a hotel may not have filled this out because they might see themselves as, you know, accessing traditional shelter services already. But it does give us a sample and an idea of what some of the barriers are to the existing system. So again, these top ones: prefer to stay outside, safety and availability or location being amongst the top of them. So with that, that's the vast majority of the data we have. There were some requests yesterday about diving into subpopulations. Can you pull all the people out in, you know, that can't find a job, lost a job, and give you the data on that? I can do that work. I was not able to get it done yesterday afternoon before today's meeting, but we can work on that in terms of some deeper dives if it's necessary and you want that deeper dive on a particular subpopulation. That can be done for you. It will just, I need a little bit more time. So, but with that, any other questions on the data on the report? And then once that's done, then I know we'd love to have a discussion with you about what can we learn from this? What can we take away? What are the things that raise to a level of concern, or what can we do better next time? But let's take questions on the data. Anything you have about my report that'll allow me to shut down the PowerPoint, and then we could have that more robust conversation about what can we learn from this. So the questions on the data or the survey.
Late, sorry, double booked here, but did you have stuff on like the ages, demographics of as far as children?
So I have I did not do the age. What I have is I have birthdays, and I didn't have the time to go through and calculate everybody's age based on the birthday. Apologize for that. What we did do is we did list those that were in families. So we know that 33% of our respondents came from families with kiddos. So whether that is, you know, 1 adult, 1 kid, or 1 adult, 5 kids, or 2 adults, 1 kid, it was just the total number of respondents. 33% of them were in a family that was defined as having children in the family. So
one of the things just we're sensing here and seeing, I don't know the term that we use now. I know it's older people or elderly or changes. Mature now, is that the word? Okay, I know I miss it every time. But with that age group, because now you're kind of getting out of that ability to maybe full-time, so you're on a fixed income, and especially now with what we're seeing, even with inflation rates going up, things are changing. What they maybe could afford and how they could afford to live in Castle Rock, that is going away, and it's affecting their ability to. What they're doing is I see people, they're still in their homes, but they're actually not eating, and so because they can't afford the food or they're changing what they can eat, and trying to get food to them, trying to help people out. But I think this is just a demographic that's really going to be affected just in this coming season. Things that are happening, rates that we're going to see. That is going to be it's a different way to address them in the same way we would address, you know, a young single male or female. They could get a job. So it's just something else to consider here as we're looking at all these things. And I think that the ages are really important.
Let me very quickly, while we're having a discussion, once I get rid of my PowerPoint and we turn the PowerPoint off, let me look real quick and let me see if I can identify at least maybe those that are over the age of 60 total. Again, we don't have all of that because we don't have birth dates on the ones that were observed, refused, or in some of our care facilities. But of the 101, we can at least get a sample set size of those that were over the age of probably 60. That's probably, I could just look at people born prior to 1960, essentially. I could do that real quick.
I think to your point, for those of you who don't know Nicole Adams, who's sitting over across from me, who's the head of our investigations units for both adult protection and child protection, we had to combine, we didn't have to, but we chose to combine an eligibility person with an adult protection worker in order to meet exactly that need. What we're finding are people who are older, who were living with their parents their entire life, or their spouse has died, and they come into a spiral and they can no longer afford their house, they can no longer afford food. So Nicole's group is teaming together, one, to make sure that they're taking good care of themselves, but also whatever services they would be eligible for through us. Sometimes that will keep them in their house, oftentimes it won't. And that is something that we're having to transition. I know Nicole's group was helped a lady just recently who is really, really mentally ill, but we helped her move because in lieu of us helping her move, she would be homeless. And I mean, and the work that went into was, I mean, enormous, but we prevented her, hopefully she'll stay, from becoming homeless. But it was that exact scenario that we just talked about. She's in that age group and now she doesn't know what.
With everything changing right now, I think this is just it's a great issue. We're going to see things happen much faster and try to adjust to things when there's minor, it's a slow boil. But man, when things hit like they are now, I think we're going to see again that tipping point. I think for that community as well, there's going to be see things really topple down here. So what do we do? How do we help those people? So we do have some solutions, some ideas. We're working on this stuff.
Faster,
It's gonna be good.
To jump on this 90-day or less, I'm just sitting here thinking, how can we substantiate focusing on that, really focus on that without causing disrespect to those who are okay being where they are, but the amount of people we could keep off the streets, could keep from being displaced. I know, without sounding biased, is really focus on that in the correct way. Because there are some that are just okay, like you were saying, being where they are, but the amount of people that we could keep from being on the other side. And then when those resources really open up, really keep trying to help those others. But I really think there's something to that 90 days to a year people, or even, 6 months, whatever that plus or minus is, really focus on those folks. The others are out there. Some do, some don't want to. We really focus on that. And it's like you said, a lot of us pay your mortgage or your rent first. I know I've eaten a lot of rice and beans myself and egg sandwiches in the time to make things work. How can we teach that kind of stuff? Better budgeting, everything else. So, everybody like egg sandwiches or something? Yeah, I grew up on them, so
That's what my mom raised me on.
that's why I said it, I guess.
Speaking of moms, I'm gonna take a mom approach here. I want to make sure that the people online have the opportunity to hear the full discussion, so we're gonna work on our audio issues in this room, but do project, and the further back we lean, the less they can hear us.
Where's the mic? Where are the microphones?
Green lights.
Green light.
That's why I turned myself that way.
That's right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I will close this off. I will say this, this presentation will be added to the minutes from this meeting and will be available on the minute track, which is our website for where we're going to collect our agendas in our public meetings. So we will put this PowerPoint presentation in a PDF version on there so that you can have it. Again, let me disclaim, right? Like, this isn't the complete picture. It is a part of the picture. This data may change as we learn more, know more. Just like yesterday when we had a discussion that said, hey, we forgot this population, I have this number. Or as it's cleaned for point in time, right? So it's not perfect. It will never be perfect, but I think it does give us a picture and a snapshot and a more thorough understanding of what we're trying to address. So.
Just for those of you who didn't benefit from the conversation we had yesterday with the work group, there were a few things that we did talk about. related to the survey, things we may want to add for the next time if you know, we're looking at doing a survey in the summer so that we can kind of address those winter issues that we're talking about, and also the fact that people we see in the summer. I think we heard from Chief Duffy that people tend to be more transient in nature, and we definitely heard that from our law enforcement, that they're seeing more people as they're, you know, coming through Castle Rock to and from our larger metropolitan areas. So we did talk about doing one in the summer, and some of the things that we talked about adding, I'm trying to remember.
We talked a little bit about potential barrier of IDs that came up yesterday. Folks, you know, you have to have an ID to stay in shelter. You have to have an ID to get a job. The barrier of getting an ID when you don't have an address, but yet an address is required. And so that was one of the barriers. We talked about adding that as a piece of information. I know that was the one that stuck out to me.
It's probably the number one thing we hear in law enforcement when we're contacting the homeless individual is what, because we're asking them, what do you need? What can we do? First thing out of their mouth is, I don't have an ID. I need to get an ID, but they don't know how or where or have.
Usually been stolen with all their stuff.
You know, so, you know, we identify a lot of people with library cards or something like that, but it's not an official ID. So they can't get into a shelter because they don't have a picture ID, a caller, acceptable identification. And then the next thing is, you know, I want to get a job, but I don't have an ID. And even if I had an ID, I don't have a mailing address. I have to have a mailing address. So it's those barriers to the ones, you know, and a lot of times you got to take it with a grain of salt. They're saying what they think we want to hear, but we do know that vast majority of the homeless we contact have no identification on them.
I would say also, when you guys do your next survey, and maybe you've done this with some of the other groups, but I would include going to like Catholic Charities. For us, I know we know we can probably help identify. I mean, we work with probably 300 that are either homeless or on the verge of homelessness. So I think even like connecting with some of the organizations, the groups, and I know there'll be some overlap because you're already, but it may help in
we did that, Mike, this time. So through the Community of Care Network, we provided training and surveys to all of our partners that attended our January appointed Community Care meeting. Steve, I'll say thanks to Steve. Steve, one of those guys that spent time with. He actually took everybody that had been provided a hotel voucher during the month of January by either Catholic Charities or by Help and Hope Center and called every single one of them and said, I know you weren't in a hotel on this Monday night. We provided you a hotel with you earlier this month. Where were you on Monday night, the 24th? And so we did quite a bit of that. Your team was out surveying. Aaron personally called. So we did as much of that as we could. Always room for more, always room for greater partnership, always opportunities to get more people involved in collecting that information. Again, it's really hard to count everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Really hard to count everybody, especially with a population that doesn't want to necessarily be counted or contacted. Like we have to recognize that as well. Right? They're a part of that.
And it looks like on the chat, I think a disclaimer is always good. I mean, and you know, Commissioner Layden has told us from the very beginning as staff that the number's not going to drive the plan. That our goal is to be proactive in the way we're going to create an opportunity to address this before it gets to a situation where we're coming from behind all the time. So we want to be as proactive as we can. We know the number's different. I mean, I know that Department of Human Services, we have somewhere like 500 people that use the Department of Human Services address for benefits. I don't know exactly, are they truly homeless or did they not have an address that day? But to the Chief's point, they had to provide an actual ID, so we know that they're Colorado and they live in Douglas County or they slept in Douglas County for one night in order to receive Department of Human Services benefits. But I don't know how many of those 500 would be counted here, and we don't know. So that number multiplied by 5 makes a ton of sense to me for this. But I do think it's important because there are going to be people who say, why would you spend a lot of time working on something for 100 people? And there's going to be people who say, good job for being proactive. And we want to be proactive. We want to be honest and transparent with how we're collecting the data, but we still want to have a proactive plan.
Yeah, and I would echo that. Mostly it's gratitude to all of you for your expertise and the way you've informed the process. And I think it's really recommendations from this group that would hopefully bubble up to the county. But Dan is right. I think the perspective is be proactive. I think the comment from our citizens that we hear from in our travels is get on top of it. So it really doesn't matter how many there are, although I think the number is incredibly instructive. It's helpful to have the information. And again, I mentioned it yesterday, but a tremendous thanks to Jen and Rand and all of those that did that count. Part of that proactive piece is, being thoughtful about how we can address this before it does get out of control. And I would say a 200%, a tripling, a 200% increase is nothing to sneeze at, but the number is relatively low compared to Denver. We've signed on to the, the net zero pledge. And the concept is to keep homelessness infrequent and rare. So if we can do that, that's a great goal, I think, for this group to try to accomplish. We can't eradicate or solve all homelessness, but boy, I think we can make it.
The one thing that I just want to share with this group is, I'm very proud. I'm always very proud of Douglas County because we always are trying to get ahead of something and look at it in the future rather than react. We're always, a lot of places are always reacting. And I think we have some very good leadership, department heads, elected officials that are like, we're going to get in front of this and we're going to try to do what we can, just like the commissioner said, to not let it get out of control. But I also think there's an important piece to understand. We need to take away, or we need to educate our public of what is really out there. That, because like to Mike's point, it's our neighbors, it's to some, it could be family, friends. I ran some numbers just for the patrol division. We started really focusing on this back in August after we had that missing 15-year-old boy and we started coming across all the homeless. So the one interesting piece, and just from August to December of 2021, we went out and contacted 117 homeless individuals. Of those, 88% were men, right? A low number, 12% were women. Same with our PIT survey. We're seeing a high propensity for men versus women, but we're seeing the women homeless numbers starting to creep. That's concerning. The other thing that I find interesting, just some numbers I wanted to bring to the group, of the people that we contacted in patrol, 63% of them are white males. And a total of 25% are a minority. So, this isn't a race or gender issue. We need to just make the public understand of what's in Douglas County. I can't speak for the entire Denver metro area, but in Douglas County, these are the numbers. The other thing that I find interesting is 52% of the people that we contacted in those 4 or 5 months were not from Douglas County. They came from the Front Range, and they have come from mostly Denver, but some from Colorado Springs, some from Jefferson County, some from, they're migrating. We talked about that of the survey. I think we're seeing, why are you migrating here?
Is it the same reason?
Yeah. And the other thing that we touched on, 26% aren't even from the state. They're coming and they're moving through. I call them travelers. They're coming through, right? And they're telling us, we contacted them up on I-25 or on one of the trails. What are you doing? Well, I came from Texas and I'm trying to get to New Mexico, or I came from Texas and I'm trying to get here, and I'm just traveling through. So we call them the travelers. And then when I run the numbers for the jail for the whole year, some of the numbers, we booked in a little over 5,300 people in our jail in Douglas County in 1 year. Of the people that we booked in, 347 were homeless. So of the jail population in Douglas County for a year, 6.5% are classified as homeless. They were homeless when they got here, and they're going to be homeless when they were released. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that impacts Douglas County. But of those 347 inmates that were homeless, 277 of them were not from Douglas County. You know, like I've said before, at any given time, 70% of our entire population in the jail are not from Douglas County. They come to Douglas County to commit crimes, we catch them, we put them in our jail. But it's a high population not from Douglas County. Not from Douglas County. 80%, or yeah, 80% are not from Douglas County.
You said it was 6.5%?
6.5% of the entire jail population in the year was classified as homeless.
That's 344 people.
347.
Sure.
Yeah. Then when you break it down, and this is the last thing I just want to touch base on, our population, males versus females, same thing. 90% of the male inmates in our jail that are homeless, 97% of the males, and 69% are white males. Only 3% of our inmate population are homeless in our jails. And then when you break it down locally, 23% of the inmates that are in our jail that were homeless came from Lone Tree. 47% came from Castle Rock, and 18% came from Parker, and only 15% came from unincorporated Douglas County. So then the question is, why is Castle Rock's population so high? And it's the one thing that I just want to, it's an issue that we're dealing with here. Don't know if this group can solve it, but Castle Rock's homeless population is rising every day. And when I really started diving in, trying to figure this out, I came up with two, I think, justifiable reasons. One, we don't have public transportation in Castle Rock. So once they get down here, they can't get out, right? They can't get on a light rail, they can't get on a bus, they can't leave. And one of the problems, one of the most frustrating things we have is when any one of the 4 law enforcement agencies in Douglas County come across a homeless individual that has an arrest warrant from outside of this county and they're taken into custody, we drive them to our jail. Law stipulates that the home agency that wrote that warrant has 48 hours to come get them and take them back to their jail so they can go before the judge. Rest of the counties are refusing to come pick up their homeless inmates. They're like, nope, we're not coming to get them. We're not going to deal with them. Legally, we can't hold them. So we have to let them go. They're in our jail for 48 hours. We let them go because we have to. We can't violate their constitutional rights. They walk out and then they can't get out of Castle Rock. So our jail captain actually started going to those inmates and say, where do you want to go? I'll give you a ride right now. I'll have one of my deputies drive you anywhere you want to go, to a shelter or whatever. And now we're hearing from some of these inmates, I kind of like Castle Rock. I think I'm going to stay here. We're like, well, that's not an option, but it is. We can't say, no, we're throwing you in the car, we're driving you to Denver. But that's, I think it is impacting this county. And it's one of the things that Sheriff Spurlock, I know, has been just addressing with these county sheriffs from Jefferson County, Arapahoe County, and Denver. Jefferson County finally came on board. They're coming down and picking them up. Arapahoe County won't come down. Denver won't come down. It's a problem. Yes, exactly. And then we're just like, what, you know, so I'm like, well, then don't write warrants for it, right? Don't make us arrest them on your arrest warrant. Just don't write the warrant. But then they have committed a crime. You know, they need to be held accountable for that, but then they're not being. You know, we arrest them. That's the first step. But then they just let them go.
Being light, you don't want them turning into Rambo then either.
As far as, what do you mean? Yeah. So that's my, I'll get off my soapbox. But I just did want to share some of those numbers with you.
That's
Mike, I wanted to respond to your earlier question about age, so I did a real quick, just cursory look, basically took everybody that was born prior to 1960, they'd be about 62 or older. We had dates, we had date of birth on 90 of our respondents. And so 2 of those 90, just over 2%, were over the age, were born prior to 1960. So not a lot born prior to 1960. And then I looked at those born after 2000. Again, those are really just, as I'm going through and can just look at birthdays and not have to calculate age. We had 23 of the 90, or 26%, that were born after the year 2000. So they'd be 21 or younger. So 23 out of the 90. So again, 26%. Now, I will say this, in general, I think that like, and I'll use Chief's data. Like we know that there were 47 in county detention. There weren't any kids there, right? Like there weren't any juveniles. There may have been a 19 or 20-year-old. There weren't any juveniles in county detention that night. So again, imperfect data because we could add a lot more people to the side that weren't born, that weren't born as a total number percentage wise. But again, part of the story that I wanted to follow up if you want that we have that based on the data we have. So
And I can also say for juveniles, a juvenile could not be released from detention without a place to go.
Correct.
The juvenile detention center cannot kick a kid out without a parent, guardian, or the Department of Human Services picking them up. So you won't have that same situation with juvenile detention.
Check in with everyone then, is if there's any other questions about the survey, any thoughts about doing the survey in the summer, from those that are here for the executive committee. Certainly heard a lot of strong support for that when we had the work group yesterday. Just need to hear what you all think about that as well.
Rand, we've talked about this before, but do you think a summer survey would make sense in conjunction with summer strive?
I think a summer survey makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. I'm not sure that it makes sense with summer strive. I go back and forth on that. We typically hold an outreach event on the week of the pit called Strive to Thrive. We were unable to do that this year because of the weather conditions. We had to cancel it because snow. Nobody wanted to be out on Tuesday night. I'm speaking a little bit off the top of my head, Aaron, but typically our summer strive is done at the end of January, or end of July, right before school starts. I'm not sure that that's the best time to do a pit count. And if we do strive earlier, we lose the opportunity to serve backpacks, which is a major piece of that event. So I think it's something that can be discussed. I think both are good events. We would have to talk about if it made sense to mash them up. One of the interesting summer influences that we see on the south end of town, especially, is the Renaissance Fair, and so that's why I think we need to understand. We may want to consider the impact of Ren Fair, and then the other thing that influences our counts in the summertime is that our hotels are oftentimes much more full. Because of weddings, because of railroad workers, because of just summertime, people come here to hang out in Castle Rock because it's beautiful and gorgeous. And so in Douglas County in general, I guess probably. So there's some things I think as we talk about a potential summer date, we need to consider Strive, Ren Fair, all those good sort of holidays, and people traveling for vacation and coming to visit family. I think all those things should be considered as we talk about when is the appropriate time over the summertime to count. So. But that's just my 2 cents. That's not the decision.
Summertime counts.
Yeah, like when would it make sense to? We do a big event. I think you're stepped out for a moment. We do a big Strive to Thrive event that typically has hundreds of people come, but not the big draw is back to school supplies. And if we do it earlier in the summer, the back to school supplies would be the draw. If we did the event, not the count. So the question is, do we do them together? Both good things. We have to figure out how we want all that to coordinate and work.
Right. Well, and that's a really good point. It's sort of a both and. I mean, obviously, because of the federal requirements, you got to do the count in the dead of winter, as you shared yesterday. But could we not do that? But also a summertime count that reflects populations that are not visible. They're going to be indoors. And to many points made yesterday, there are young people that are living families from the school district in Delaware that are not going to be able to count necessarily because of visible locations.
And the summertime is actually a little bit harder to get a hold of them because they're not in school. Where during the school year, they're in school. We have teachers and administrators and staff at school that are keeping an eye on them and helping them and serving them and ensuring that they, are taken care of in many ways. Right? Our teachers are great service providers to our vulnerable kids, right? In all kinds of scenarios. And in the summertime, the dead of summer, they don't have all of those same support systems in place. So again, going back to the weather thing, it's kind of there's never a perfect time unless you do it every night.
I think I'm seeing anybody online. All right, well, to come on that, it sounds like we will start exploring what that can look like and trying to nail down days and that sort of thing. I've certainly heard the need to capture, that traveler population, as you said, Chief Duffy. I think that will be a very interesting thing to note on the summer survey, especially.
Going from warm to colder to warm climates, they call themselves the travelers.
Decision they're
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a large group of 18-plus-year-old, or probably maybe some younger, but that age group that choose to.
And it goes back to, we talked about it when we first formed the initiative, was coming up with Douglas County's definition of a homeless, right? So I'm not gonna deter our patrolmen from stopping to talk to them, because most of the time they're getting called about either a suspicious person or a welfare check, because they're seeing somebody sleeping on the trail or walking down the highway and stuff. So we contact them and we find out, oh, they're traveling, right? But does that necessarily make him, or do I count that as a homeless person in Douglas County? And that's where I'm gonna start kind of digging through the numbers so that it's right. Because hey, if you're here on Tuesday, but they've just walked 15 miles and they got another 15 miles to keep going north to get to Arapahoe County, are they really homeless in Douglas County? No, they just spent the night. That's it. And they haven't, they didn't commit any crime. They weren't committing crimes. They're very respectful. They got their backpack and their sleeping bag, and they're just, a lot of them are like, is it okay if I sleep here? And we're like, well, it's not against the law. Just don't block a trail or don't go on somebody's private property. And they're pretty respectful about that. I don't really classify them as homeless, but I am tracking them, right? Because oftentimes they're like, well, I haven't eaten in 2 days. That's our deputies, because I can't tell you how many hundreds of times our deputies are like, jump in my car and I'll drive you to McDonald's and I'll get you a sandwich. And they do it all the time, or I'll get you some water.
Well, I do want to, unless we have any other follow-up questions or anything like that, do want to let you all know kind of next steps. Our next meeting will be March 10th. We have scheduled Jeff Briggs from the Springs Rescue Mission to come in and do a presentation. We're going to do a joint presentation with the work group and the executive committee for that meeting. And I would encourage you all, if there is something, because we did have a fairly thorough discussion about the Springs Rescue Mission, but Jack has offered, if there's something specific that you're particularly interested in hearing about, we'd like to hear about that so that we can let him know that there's an interest along those lines. But he's looking forward to coming and joining us next time. So I think that'll be a good conversation. And then kind of looking forward, one of the things that we'd like to begin discussing is, what sort of approach each jurisdiction is taking as far as working with their homeless population, what sort of, maybe from a law enforcement perspective, what approach they're taking, what sort of policies, ordinances, enforcement that they're utilizing for that. So I think, that might be a topic of conversation in April, that we'll ask people to come prepared to share what they're doing in their jurisdictions, and also, let us know how that's working, and what the pain points are around that. So that's kind of what we're thinking about for the April meeting. So appreciate hearing everybody's feedback and input. We certainly want to make this an interactive and robust conversation. So if there is something that, you know, as a topic that you are interested in talking about, I know kind of issue of how we are able to, I guess, serve better the youth population that's experiencing homelessness came up in our work group yesterday and might be a good topic of conversation going forward for this group. So do let us know. Pat, we're here. Happy to hear your feedback at any point. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Commissioner Layden. Do you have any kind of closing?
Well, briefly, thanks, Jen. You know, we've done 36 live town halls in a year and a half. So we really enjoyed citizen engagement, really informed by expertise, people on all sides of a particular issue. We are beginning to do some podcasts from the commissioner standpoint and in March. I'm going to be doing the first in a series of podcasts around homelessness. And I just wanted to extend the invitation to any of you here in person or online, if you would like to join me or have that conversation, share your expertise, your input. The purpose of the podcast is it is a little bit more academic, but it is to engage in conversation, understand more from an expertise-driven standpoint, and just talk about maybe lived-in experience and some of the frameworks we're seeing. So if you're interested in that, let us know. I mentioned this in our work group yesterday. I really wanted to extend the invitation to everyone to continue to provide their input around how we're thinking about homelessness in Douglas County. You often heard us talk about the four C's around compassion, code enforcement, community services, and communications. There may be something beyond that that we're not thinking of, and very likely so. So I would really invite you to join us in that conversation. And the final piece is we're thinking about immediacy and impact. So ultimately, this will turn into our county commissioners will need to get some recommendations and make some decisions about. One of the early things that I think I'm really excited about is modeling the co-responder health initiative to pair law enforcement with the human services professional, connect with individuals in the community experiencing homelessness. That's not going to work for a displaced 13-year-old who maybe got kicked out of her home, but perhaps for an individual that you may see that's panhandling in a median and unsafely doing so. Is there a number that is easily accessible, top of mind, to reach a co-responder team that can connect with that individual, divert them from any sort of criminalization, so they're not going to jail. They're also not going to an ER, so we're hopefully helping our hospitals, our DA's budgets, and law enforcement, but then direct with transportation to community services. So I know a lot of conversation there. The goals facility will probably be another maybe tour that we do and maybe some more conversation there. But we continue to talk about continuum of care, wraparound services, and whole person care. And what does that look like when the co-responder team does take that individual to shelter or a location where there are more services and case management. So a lot to unpack. But thank you so much for your engagement today, guys. I really appreciate all of you. Thank you for your time.
Well, with that, as we hear often, we are going to give you back 30 minutes of your time. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next